Welcome to the Fantasy Baseball Beat, part of the Triple Play Fantasy. Oh my gosh. You're going to have to edit this out, Dave.
Okay.
I just said Triple Play. Obviously, it's not Triple Play.
You got a lot of echo, too. I don't know if you're picking up on that, Dave. I don't know if you guys hear it or if it's me.
No, I didn't hear that.
Okay.
You hear echo right now?
No.
Okay, so my sound is good?
I think so.
Okay. All right, let's try this again. Welcome to the Fantasy Baseball Beat, part of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Chris Torres. I'll be your host today. We've got a great show for you this evening. At least I think so. And I hope you agree. We've got probably our favorite guest that we've had on in our 50 or so episodes that we've done of this show. I think this will be his fourth time on with us and super excited to chat with him again. And that person is Jack Sommers of Sports Illustrated. He's going to be on today. He writes about the Diamondbacks for SI. And we'll be talking all things Diamondbacks. Obviously, they're in the news right now with the Corbin Burnes signing. So going to get his take on the fantasy ramifications of that move and much, much more. Mike, Dave, and I will also be continuing our ADP talk and each identifying several landmines or avoids that are currently going in the 100 to 200 range of ADP. But before we get to all of that, let me bring in my co-hosts, Mike Carter and Dave Funnell. I'm just going to get right to it, guys. And I want to know, Corbin Burnes right now is going in the third round of fantasy drafts. All right, still early, but I think he's probably going to settle in that range. And now that we know his team, I think we could be confident in where he'll be, when the major drafts kick off. So I'm going to start with you, Mike. Are you interested right now in Corbin Burnes in the third round?
You know, we talked about this last time we were all on together about how I'm not going to be wishy-washy anymore, and I'm just going to tell you straight up what I'm thinking. I'm not going to hedge my bets. I'm not going to be looking for support or wringing my hands in the corner, clutching grandmother's pearls here. Yes, I'm very interested in Corbin Burnes. I don't know why you wouldn't be. I think this is a really good landing spot for him. I think he's going to be happier living in Arizona and being home near his kids. We'll see how that impacts him in real life. But I really like the team context for him. I think the Diamondbacks are a really interesting team to go to. And he projects as their ace. And granted, tough division. The NL West is not an easy place to pitch, but he's proven that he can pitch in tough divisions before. I anticipate that his ADP is actually going to go up.
Okay, what about you, Dave?
Yeah, I'm actually in on him too, and it's kind of weird to say that because that's usually not how I build a team. I don't usually draft pitchers early on, but I'm in on him because I think he can maintain. I know he did a pitch change late in the season. He started to use his cutter more. He refined it or something like that. And his September whiff rate was it was through the roof. So he said that he made changes. If he can continue that, I think he's definitely worth picking at that ADP.
Mm-hmm.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
At the ADP right now, would you rather have him or Garrett Crochet? They're about the same.
I would take Corbin Burnes. I think he's more reliable, and I think he's more of a workhorse, and he doesn't have the injury history that would worry me as much.
Chris, how about you? What do you think?
Man. Well, first of all, if you want Garrett Crochet, you're going to have to pay a second round price for him now. After the trade, I think people, even though it wasn't the best landing spot for him, you're going to have to pay up now because he's definitely gone up and he's going ahead of Burnes. I'm in. I think in the past, like last year, I was out because I saw some declining strikeout numbers from Burnes, and I was getting a little concerned about that. But I'm kind of thinking about pitching a little bit differently, and I think I almost compare him or feel like he's similar to like a Zach Wheeler, where these guys may not have astounding strikeout numbers, but they're just such good pitchers and they limit hard contact that I would be totally fine if he is my SP1. So my answer to that, as far as whether I'm in on him in the third round, is yes. But let's talk a little bit more about Burns and all things Diamondbacks here. Let's bring in Jack Sommers. And he, like I said, he is a publisher at Locked On SI, Locked On Diamondbacks for SI. And he actually was he was a baseball operations department analyst for the Diamondbacks. So given his experience as a writer and working for the organization, I feel like Jack has as good of knowledge of this team as anybody out there. And I always plug his work because I think the things he writes about and the things he covers I find just so insightful. And we've loved having him on because every time he brings the energy, and he brings really good info. So you can follow him on Twitter at ShoeWizard59, and highly recommend that you go follow him. So Jack, welcome to the show. Thank you so much. You're always so gracious with your time. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and it's fun to be here with you guys. Nothing better than talking baseball.
Absolutely. All right. So I think you heard us talking a little bit about Corbin Burns, and obviously that's the big news for the Diamondbacks, right? A surprising move, according to many people. Just I didn't hear any rumors that Burns was looking at Arizona. Found out afterward that that's home for him. He just had twins, so it definitely made sense in retrospect that this was, a sign he just wanted to be close to home. But he signs a 6-year deal, and which I think was actually pretty reasonable compared to what some of these pitchers are getting in the market currently. But I got to ask you, I know you wrote about like just being surprised by this move, but tell me a little bit about like what your initial reaction was when you first saw this move was made.
Well, my initial reaction was shock and surprise. I mean, they were in on him at the trade deadline a couple of years ago. But at that time, I think it was going to cost him Alec Thomas to get Corbin Burns at the 23 trade deadline, and maybe more, but for sure Thomas, it was going to cost him. And Mike Hazen wasn't willing to go that far, but they've always liked him. But heading into this offseason, I mean, they never talked about going after starting pitching, other than we knew they were among every other team that scouted Roki Sasaki, right? And they actually went to Japan, and Mike Hazen went to Japan and scouted him. But outside of that, they never talked about going after starting pitching. It was all about replacing all the free agent bats they lost and beefing up the bullpen. So from that perspective, it was, what? They signed a starter? Like, no idea. And the second thing was the finances. They were at a franchise record payroll last year, like around 177 million at the end of the day. It was 13th in Major League Baseball. And they were tracking to match that this year. So I'm like, okay, how's that going to work? When they signed him, I was like, how are they going to pay all this money? Well, subsequently, some information came out. I think you guys were just talking about it. The fact that he approached them. He wanted to come to Arizona or pitch for Arizona. One of my writers works at a Chipotle part-time. And he said that Burns came in one time and they were chatting and he was like, yeah, I'd love to pitch for Arizona. And I'd also heard that, he'd had conversations with other Arizona players. And man, I want to pitch for you guys. So he really wanted to pitch here for a long time. It wasn't just a one-off. I think they went out, got the best offers they could, compared them. And then they went to the Diamondbacks and said, hey, I really want to pitch for you. We'll do this. The terms that they ended up coming up with, they deferred $60 million of his deal. So of the $210 million, he gets $10 million signing bonus. He gets 20, and then 30 for each of the next 4 years if he doesn't opt out. But $10 million a year are deferred. Now, deferrals, that $10 million that's deferred now has to be deposited in an escrow investment account on his that's there for him within July 1st of the following year. So by July 1 of 2026, that $10 million has to go in. But that makes them affordable now. And then they have a bunch of free agents, including Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly and a few others that are leaving. So, they'll be able to figure it out. So they were making the money work too.
Jack, you had just brought up Zach Gallen, and that's who I really wanted to ask you about. In your article that you wrote in December 28th, you said that he might be a potential trade candidate now with the signing of Burns. tell the listeners why you think that might be possible. And as a corollary to that, tell us about any other potential follow-up moves you could see the Diamondbacks making in return.
Right. So, if you kind of go back to that article, the first thing I mentioned was Jordan Montgomery is still the most likely move for them to try to make. It's just a matter of when they can pull that off and how much money they can save. So that's their first choice. I mean, they want to move Montgomery. There's no doubt about that. But they don't want to eat the money, or they want to eat very little of it. And so what they're doing is they're kind of hanging back, seeing how desperate teams get. Maybe people that missed out on Burns, somebody has a spring training injury or whatever, that might allow them to then offload Montgomery's contract at a higher rate, like 15 million or even 20 million of the 22.5 that he's owed. So that's like always been the first, and I kind of mentioned that in that article. And I prefaced the Gallen comment by saying, this is a little bit more of a radical and kind of out there possibility. But a lot of people thought the same thing. A lot of people came to the same conclusion. What does this mean for Zach Gallen? So I entertained the possibility in the article, like, they could potentially trade him. Why would they do that? Well, he's a free agent. He's a Scott Boras client. I can absolutely confirm that he's looking to be a free agent. He's not looking to do an extension. So he's going to go to the highest bidder. So that being the circumstance, I mean, you can't discount the possibility that some team would come by and say, hey, well, we'll give you everything in the world for Zach Gallen, and they're going to need a Godfather offer still to do it because they want to win in 2025, but you can't rule it out. It just seems, kind of since this has all gone down, additional information that's come out. I mean, they're really just focused on winning in 2025 right now. Yes, this deal gives them flexibility if they lose Gallen and Kelly and Montgomery. They got 3 guys that are free agents next year, so that gives them insurance. But at the same time, I mean, they got a great opportunity here to run out the best 1-2 in baseball. So I think they're going for it.
So,
absolutely.
As a follow-up, though, if they don't make a trade, who do you think would be the odd man out of that rotation?
Unfortunately, I think the way that shakes out is Ryan Nelson, which is tough for me to accept because his breakout in the second half of last year was especially satisfying to me because I followed him really closely, had a lot of great conversations with him about all the changes he was making and really dove into it. And I was, somewhat invested in his success. So when he broke out in the second half, I was like stoked. I mean, hey, I'm a writer, but I'm still part of me as a fan. Can't help it. I'm not going to hide it. And but I'm a fan of the people, right? Like when you look at a guy and you see how hard they're working and he's just so open and humble and straightforward. He's a great guy. So I was really happy for his success. But I mean, you look at the list of pitchers they have, he's lower down on the depth chart just because of experience and standing and all of that. But if he's pitching well and other people aren't, then they won't hesitate to make the move they need to make either. They want to win. And so, staying consistent with that, if Brendan falters or, Erod's not pitching well, I mean, I don't think they'll have any problem to do what they need to do. Quick questions, will they do it quickly enough? Sometimes in these circumstances, teams just take a little too long to make that move.
Mm-hmm.
Too long for our liking, but they're baseball executives at that level for a reason, right? They're patient.
Yeah. All right, continuing with the theme of pitching here, let's talk about Brent Strom for a moment. Now, let me tell you, in the fantasy community, we low-key love Brent Strom. There's always been this love for him going back to when he was with the Astros, and I remember when he went to the D-backs, and there was like a lot of excitement about what he could do with some of their young pitchers. And I didn't even realize this until I started researching for this pod. I didn't realize that he was actually fired as the Diamondbacks pitching coach. Right. And it looks like he is now being replaced by former Phillies assistant pitching coach Brian Kaplan.
Right.
So I was wondering if you could give us your thoughts on the impact of that move and also what you know so far about Brian Kaplan.
Well, first off, full disclosure, Brent Strom is a dear friend. So on a personal level, it was painful to see that happen with him. But I'm objective and I'm a reporter and I do what I do. And I've had lots of very frank talks with him as well. And, he was a great communicator, with the younger pitchers, but for whatever reason, the more veteran pitchers seem to be tuning him out. And what they wanted, what they felt that they needed was more help in their weekly preparation and the physical aspects of it. They didn't need to work. They didn't feel like they needed to work on their grips or pitching mechanics so much. Whereas, the younger pitchers, I mean, Brandon Pfaadt and Nelson, they worked very closely with Strom, and they made a lot of improvements because they were still in that developmental phase of their career. But the more veteran guys, whether it was Montgomery or Kelly or Gallen, I think that they just felt like they weren't getting what they needed out of Strom. And when you combine that with the fact that the team, ranked very poorly in ERA and every other metric out there, that's what precipitated that. What I can tell you about Kaplan, his background came from strength and conditioning. He ran a center that really specialized in that, and that's what he brings first and foremost to the table. And when talking to him, and we actually have a Q&A up on our website that we did with him, if anyone wants to go back and read it. The emphasis for him is helping these guys after the 5 days between starts, how to get ready, how to prepare physically, up their game at that level, and of course in strength and conditioning, injury prevention, things like that. The Diamondbacks medical team has a lot of influence over a lot of decisions that go on with this team, how far they let guys go, which relievers are available, more so than maybe most teams. I mean, like they're really tight on that. So I think having a guy with Kaplan's background on strength and conditioning maybe allows for a little bit better synergy potentially in that area, that they feel that they need to improve. They still have Dan Harron working as a pitching strategist in the background. So he sits there and reviews all the video and the stuff and all the StatCast data, and helps pitchers work on attack plans. So they come at it from a few different angles with a few different people. But look for Kaplan to be focused on helping them avoid injury, strength, conditioning, and all of that stuff first.
That's really
Not
interesting.
That's
yeah.
Ticket to the table.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting because we were in preparing for this. Myself and Dave were talking, and Dave follows injuries very closely. So one thing that he was going to touch on was like talking about potential injury risks heading into the year that are currently on this team. And he commented like they're pretty healthy, like they're pretty all around. Like there hasn't been like too many major injuries. So it's interesting now that you say like the emphasis that the organization puts on that. I wonder if that's a blueprint for, let's say, the Minnesota Twins or, some of these organizations that are constantly dealing with injuries.
Well, I think, you look at also the success in Philadelphia, right? I mean, certainly that was a big part of their success. And you look at how a lot of their pitchers just are durable and strong and have done so well. And of course, their total pitching production just really jumped over the last couple of years, right? Mm-hmm. So, not just from the big studs at the front, but, they figured out ways to get more out of their bullpen and stuff like that. So I think it's a legit issue. Look, the holy grail is how to keep pitchers healthy, right? Nobody's figured that out yet. Nobody's ever gonna, And the other thing too is like, look, I'm a baseball reference addict, right? Like I sit there and I just randomly look at pages like all the time of historical guys. And it's so funny. You look at, back when men were men in the 50s and 60s and 70s, right? And you see these guys all of a sudden with the big innings jump, and they, pitch a lot for a couple of years. And then inevitably production drops, innings come off. There are a few guys, obviously your Hall of Famers and all that. But when you're not talking about the Hall of Famer guys that had 15, 20-year careers at an ace level, once you get past that layer, it's all the same. Guys pitch more than they ever have before, and they get hurt. It's always been that way. This is not new. This is not random. But I think, in the modern game, obviously pitchers are all going max effort. And until really baseball figures out a way to incentivize pitchers not to have to pitch max effort, then you're still going to see this increase in pitching injuries. That's it.
You're not wrong, especially since pitching is such an unnatural motion. So I don't know how they're going to fix it, but you're right. They do need to somehow incentivize that.
I have a few thoughts, but
Well,
that's not what the topics are today. Save that for another day.
Yeah. Last season, you guys, you gave us a great breakdown on Corbin Carroll and his struggles in the first half of the season. And he went on to have a great second half, hitting 17 home runs with 17 steals. And it's landed him back in the first round of fantasy drafts. Would you bet on him carrying that strong second half into this year?
Great question. It's funny. I went back and checked his game logs, and I went from game 90 onwards, right? Team game 90 onwards. And it was actually 20 homers, 20 steals from team game 90 on. He had a 258 average, 928 OPS. The thing with that, I mean, regression is a harsh mistress, right? He's not going to maintain that level over a full season. I think he very easily could do 20-40 again. We're going to talk about his stolen bases over under. When you look at his over and under performance in that first and second half, for example, he had a 387 WOBA, but he had a 356 xWOBA, right? So, 31 points of WOBA over performance. The slugging, his X slug was 474 versus an actual slug of 577. So his expected slugging was 100 points lower than his actual during that hot stretch. So I would not count on, a 35-40 homer pace from Carroll for a full season. But there's absolutely no reason he shouldn't be over 20 homers and at or above 40 steals. So I think he's a very solid bet for that. The caveat is always going to be with him is I'm always going to be a little nervous about that shoulder. I can't help it. It's like I've watched him grab that thing, but not last year. Were any of the difficulties last year ultimately tied to the shoulder? He always said no. He's the player. I have to believe him. So I might have been wrong about that, but I'm still always going to be a little nervous watching that aspect of it. He's still got that big follow through, and it comes all the way back. His arm just comes all the way behind here holding that bat, and I was like, oh man, that looks like it hurts.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, but I'd say, stick with him. Definitely don't give up on Corbin Carroll and think that the second half was a fluke. I mean, if anything was a fluke, it was the first half. He's definitely a much better player than that. So, look for 25 homers, look for 40 steals, maybe more. Hopefully he avoids injury and the long-term slump. I don't think he's going to dig into such a big hole again.
All right. Well, that is good news. Thank you for that confirmation, Jack. I just took him in the first round of my most recent draft, so I'm hoping he carries that strong second half over. We are here with Jack Sommers of Sports Illustrated. We are going to take a quick commercial break, and we will be back with more Diamondbacks talk.
All right, we are back. Jack, I'm going to put you on the spot here. I'm a bullpen guy, and I've been talking with you offline about some potential additions that the Diamondbacks might be looking to make. But I'm going to start with a question first. Of A.J. Puck, Justin Martinez, and the field, out of those three options, who do you think leads this team in saves in 2025? If it's the field, give us your top three guys that you think they could be looking to sign. I know one of them already because you and I have talked about it offline. But who do you think leads this team in saves going this year?
Well, I'm going to take the field because I think they're still very committed to bringing in a closer or high-end, back-end, high-leverage guy. So definitely I'm taking the field for right now. And then, the names that I have, really, it's one free agent and a couple of 2-3 trade potential targets. I think Kirby Yates is a guy that they have been linked to, and from a lot of areas, from a lot of angles, that makes a lot of sense for them. Tanner Scott's out of their range, right? That's just going to be too expensive. He's not getting 480 like he's asking for, but 456, 448, somewhere along there. There's no doubt about it. And I don't think that they're going to pay that much for a closer. Trade targets. Although the Cardinals are playing hard to get with Ryan Helsley, I still think that could happen. I think that they weren't able to come to an agreement there. I think they talked fairly seriously, but they didn't make a deal. So, whether it was the Diamondbacks didn't want to give up one of their starting center fielders with 4 years of control for 1 year of a reliever, or the other way around, the Cardinals wanted more, that I'm not sure of. I just know that they weren't able to cut a deal. Fairbanks is, out there and a potential trade target, and they've been linked to him as well. And actually, my good friend John Gambadoro on Arizona Sports dropped David Bednar out there as a potential guy that they're actually even being considered with. And one of my favorite relievers of all time, and I'd just like to see them, kick the tires on him, is David Robertson. I mean, he's just been so good for so long, really came back the last couple of years. But because of his age, he's not going to require a 3-year deal. I mean, one in an option probably gets it done. And because of his age, I don't think he's going to need $14 million to sign. I think, 10, 11 would get him there. So just to me, it makes a lot of sense that he would be a potential option. But I don't have any intel from the team on that. Mike Hazen will never speak to you about a free agent.
All right, well, let's talk about some players that are currently on the team, and we're going to play a little game of over-under. And in addition to that, in addition to selecting over or under on the figure that I'm going to give you, I'm going to ask you to rate your confidence level on a 0 to 100 scale. So we're going to start with Pavin Smith. So Steamer has him projected for right around 450 at-bats. Would you take the over or under on that?
I'm going to take the under and 75% confidence level.
Okay.
The reason for that, real quick, is look, there's 108 starts maximum against right-hand pitchers, basically, 54 against lefties. And he's not going to be the first baseman. He's going to be the DH. So, maybe he starts 90, 100 games at DH. And when you work it all out, and the fact that he's going to get pinch hit for a lot against when they bring in a lefty, he doesn't hit lefties. So, that's going to limit him. So even if he's really healthy and he plays almost every day, he's not going to get quite as much playing time as Jock Peterson did. And I would project him under 450.
Okay. We talked about Corbin Carroll. Over under 40 steals.
I took the over and 75%. And I think we pretty much laid out the case there. I think he's going to have a good year. If he's out there and he's on base, there's no reason he's not going to run. Also, the D-backs are likely to hit fewer homers in 2025, just in general as a team, and they're going to be a little less home run dependent to generate runs. So they're going to need to get back to running. So look for him to maybe have a big stolen base year.
Okay. Good news for his fantasy managers. All right. These next two are kind of correlated here. I'm going to ask you about Geraldo Perdomo and Jordan Lawler. So first with Perdomo, I'll give you 450 at-bats for him, over under.
I took over, but 50%.
Okay.
And then Lawler, I also took over 200 at 50%. Now, the way that works is twofold. I mean, it's possible for one to get 450 to 500 and the other get 200, almost all at shortstop. But Lawler's also going to play some second base because I know that they're going to definitely give Ketel Marte some extra reps at DH. And he could even play some third base and give Eugenio Suarez some days off there. Or if anybody gets hurt, right? If anybody gets hurt, then he's going to come up and play full time. Mike Hazen said he wanted Lawler to play full time. He didn't want him hanging out as a utility guy, but they basically only have him and Blaze Alexander, who's a little shaky on defense. Especially at shortstop. He's fine at second, but he was a little shaky at shortstop defense. So, they don't want Lawler hanging out as a utility player playing twice a week. So they're going to have him probably start the year in AAA, but when he comes up, he's going to start at least 4 games a week.
Got it.
He might be rotating around the infield, or if anybody gets hurt, he's just going to, if Suarez, Marte, or Perdomo goes down, Lawler is going to play.
Okay. Ryan Nelson, we talked about him earlier as well. Over under 20 starts.
I had to take the under, man.
Ah.
I had to take the under just because of this current situation, but I only put 25% confidence level in that because you never know with pitching, right? If something opens up, then it wouldn't be that hard for him to then get back into that 25-30 start range. So, I had to take the under based on the current situation, gun to my head. But if you ask me, in March, I might have a different answer.
All right. And last one, Adrian Del Castillo, 250 at-bats.
Under.
Okay.
He's got a lot of work to do on defense. Mike Hazen indicated pretty clearly to us at the winter meetings that, he's actually even still behind on the depth chart behind Jose Herrera. If you remember, Del Castillo was optioned down the stretch last year. The defense needs a lot of work. And we also were asking him, are you considering using Del Castillo as a DH? And he said no. He said he wouldn't rule it out. And it was funny in the way he answered. He says, I can't say for sure we wouldn't have him come up and DH. So that was a tip-off to me that he's definitely starting here in the minors unless something happens in spring training with one of their catchers. And then he talked a lot about the defense, but they're not going to bring him up and slot him in the DH spot and let him occasionally catch. They're not there yet. They want to work on his defense. They want him to be able to catch, a third of the games, but he's not there yet defensively.
That makes sense. Last year, Jack, when you were on with us, you gave us Del Castillo as a name to watch in the minor leagues, and that turned out to be a really prescient call on your part. This year, kind of moving forward, who would your pick be for a player who's currently in the minors that has a chance to make a significant impact on the D-backs at the major league level this year?
Well, this is kind of a deep sleeper, but I'm going to go with Tim Tawapawa. They got a guy named Tim Tower, hit 31 home runs last year between AA and AAA. Sure, he's 26 years old. He's not a young guy, as your typical prospect, and he was in great offensive environments. So you always discount those numbers. But he's a right-handed hitter that can play all around the diamond. He can play first, he can play second, he can play corner outfield, he can even play some third base. He's right-handed. They may end up needing another right-handed bat. It looks like Randall Grichuk's not coming back. We don't know yet who they might bring in. So I would keep an eye on him. I think he's got pretty legitimate power. And so if he gets a couple hundred at-bats, I can see a guy like that coming up and getting a couple hundred at-bats and hitting 10 a dozen homers. Oh, you guys went silent. I don't hear you.
Sorry about that. Quick question. Who's been your favorite player to cover on this team and why?
Well, unfortunately, he just signed with the Houston Astros. Christian Walker was by far the person that I enjoyed covering as a journalist and as a reporter the most. Just terrific guy to talk to, so intelligent. You learned something every single time you spoke to Christian Walker, and he was always willing to talk no matter the situation. Just the most gracious individual and intelligent and, just a real gamer. And again, where he came from, that was fun. Now he's gone, and they got a good clubhouse, and I don't want to, be too favoritism on one guy or the other, but I'll talk two guys that are kind of fun to interview with and chat with. One is Jake McCarthy. He's got a great sense of humor. And when you talk to him, he's willing to open up. He'll tell you quite a bit. He's not, some guys are a little bit more reserved, cards to the chest. And Jake will tell you what he's really thinking and feeling. And he's very open and honest and humble. And he's really good that way. And another, I just want to mention, I don't know how much playing time he's going to get, but he's funny as hell. It's Blake Walston. Just terrific sense of humor. He told some great stories when he was called up, talking about, he was in the casino playing poker and when he got the word and, then he told a funny story about his dad missing a flight, and he had the whole press corps rolling just in the way he told his stories. And so really, funny, down home Southern guy that's just got a great sense of humor.
Awesome. All right, Jack. Well, we are going to leave it there. As always, we're so appreciative of your time and your insights. If you could just take a moment to tell our listeners where they could find you on social media and anything that you might be working on, and where they could find it.
Sure. As you mentioned at the top of the show, you can find me on Twitter, X, at ShoeWizard59. Our website is Arizona Diamondbacks on SI. It's a Sports Illustrated website, and the web address is si.com/MLB/Diamondbacks.
All right, good stuff. Thank you again. We are going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back with more fantasy baseball talk.
Thanks, guys. Great to talk to you.
Jack. You too. Take care.
Thanks, Jack. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Boy, we got jobbed yesterday, didn't we? That was definitely targeting. I don't care what anybody says. Helmet first, head was raised. That was targeting all the way. There's no doubt.
That was a tough one.
All right, guys. I'm gonna check out. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye, Jack.
All right, you noted the time, Dave?
35:28. I got it. Yeah.
Beautiful. Let's okay, we'll just leave that blank. Okay. So start up here. Okay, we are back with our fantasy follow-up segment. So for this next segment, I just wanted to get some insight here from Mike following our discussion with Jack. We touched on the bullpen situation and in Arizona, and there's a lot up in the air there. But I wanted to hear from you, Mike, if you could, first of all, give us like a one player in this pen who you think is going to be a strong source of saves and our holds. And I recognize that saves are really hard to predict right now, given everything that's in flux. But give us a name or two that we should be looking at as fantasy managers.
Well, they've got a lot of depth here, and this bullpen is a really interesting one from the standpoint that they've got a number of different guys who can close and a number of different guys who have a little bit of closing experience here. And I think if we're looking at an ADP situation, I think most people are thinking that Justin Martinez is going to be the closer. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I know the three of us have talked off air about AJ Puck being a guy that's there and who was just flat out dominant and nasty in the second half. However, there seems to be a propensity for him to be used as the highest leverage guy coming out middle of the game, and that he would not be necessarily in that closer role. I know Jack and I had talked offline too about the possible addition of a guy like Kirby Yates. I wonder kind of out loud if Kirby Yates is really that much better of an option than anything that they already really have. Now, Jack obviously knows more about that than I do. Kirby Yates does have the experience. He is a veteran. Martinez did show some signs of being shaky down the stretch. But a guy that doesn't get a lot of play in this bullpen that was really valuable for them last year was Ryan Thompson. He's not going to give you a lot of strikeouts. He's not going to give you great ratios necessarily. But what he does just about better than anyone is get a lot of ground balls. And he had 24 holds last year. So he actually led the team in holds by a pretty long shot over Kevin Ginkel, who had, I think, about 17. And Ginkel's always been a guy that they've talked about too in that bullpen in terms of, is he could be a closer. Well, it didn't go so well when they tried it a couple of years ago. So they've got a lot of depth in this bullpen. It's going to be really interesting to see how it shakes out. Obviously, if they get Kirby Yates and that bumps Martinez and Puck down a little bit, I think that they would be great candidates for holds. But if it remains the way that it is right now, I think a guy like Ryan Thompson could really be a valuable player in saves and holds leagues.
Okay. Yeah, we got to give some love to the people playing in holds leagues. I don't personally play in any of those, but I know many do. So I want to give a shout out to somebody maybe of value there. So Ryan Thompson, and I assume if they bring in a closer, AJ Puck and Justin Martinez are also, like that's going to be a pretty strong bullpen overall.
Yeah, I would think so. And I think that I really like what they've done there in regards to trying to combat the higher market, big spending, evil Dodgers and Padres and things like that. They've got some guys that can get people out in key situations late. There's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we are going to transition now away from the Diamondbacks and discuss some fantasy baseball ADP more generally here. So last episode, we went through the top 100 picks currently going in ADP, and this was ADP according to the NFBC website. We each picked a couple players that we thought were landmines or avoids in that range. So I wanted to continue that today and go from picks 100 to 200 and have each of us identify 2 players that we are completely avoiding, that we're just writing off our list. So I'm going to start with Dave. If you could give me your 2 players and give me your reason why.
Yeah, my 2 players. Well, first one, it's Zach Neto right now. He had the off-season shoulder surgery, but we don't know what it was. We don't know what the procedure was, and they were very vague on the amount of time that he would miss. They said he would miss time, but they didn't really say what it was, the timeline, or anything. So the amount of it was frustrating about how vague things are with them and what they were saying and what they weren't saying. Depending on the severity, it could take up to 6 months on average for players to return, even to just get back to live batting practice. So 6 months, that takes us to May, and that's assuming that there are no setbacks. So before I'm willing to invest in him, I would need to know. I would need to know a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Seems like a lot of people are just, you know, like they don't want him to fall too far. It's Zach Neto. Like I did a draft, as sick as this is, I did a draft in October, and I took him, I think around like pick 60. So I think people are looking at it. It's like, you can't, you know, it feels like a value where you're getting him currently around pick 200. But yeah, I agree with you that shoulder, any shoulder issue, I feel like for a hitter or a pitcher really, is really scary. And without having that definitive timeline, it's tough for me to take him there.
Yeah. And if you do, you got to have a backup, just to like a good backup, someone who wouldn't necessarily be just a middle infielder.
Yep.
And my other one is Brian Wu.
Woo.
Woo, indeed. He had forearm and elbow inflammation last year, and he had MRIs, and every time they said there was no damage noticed, but they used him so cautiously last season. He only pitched more than 90 pitches or more 3 times, 80 pitches or more 7. And I honestly don't know how he stayed healthy all season. I personally last season, once I saw these injuries, I traded him away. And this was even in a dynasty league because I thought he would be injured. And right now he's got an ADP of 137. If there's no IL, I'm not drafting him at all because I think once he does get injured, it's going to be for an extended amount of time. In keeper leagues, I would take him at a reduced cost, but I'm not paying for what he did last year because I don't think he's going to be able to do it this year.
Okay, so Dave's 2 picks are Zach Neto and Brian Wu. Let's move on to you, Mike. Who are you avoiding in this ADP range?
Yeah, I had about 6 or 8 guys, and it was pretty easy to kind of go through that and look at it and say, you know, the new Mike Carter is definitive, you know. And my first definitive take on this is avoid Alexis Diaz in any league possible. Steamer is still giving him 29 saves for next year, for this coming season, I should say. I don't know if that's really going to happen or not. There's been a lot of trade rumors about Diaz, but what I don't like, yeah, you get saves, but they're what my old friend Michael Simeone would refer to as painful saves. You're going to have an ERA over 4. You're going to have a K- walk rate that's going to be really detrimental to what you're trying to do. And you're not going to get a lot of strikeouts. You know, he averages about a strikeout an inning. And for an ace reliever, I'm looking for a little bit more than that. So even if I were to get him in a situation where I'd be looking at him as my number 2 guy, I'm really not interested in this point. Unless he made some serious changes, which I don't think he's going to do. And my other one, and this one pains me to say because I love him as a player, I think it's another one of those situations where he's a better player in real life than he is in our fantasy game, and that's Bryce Terang. Bryce Terang has really got a lot of helium going for him. He's really kind of, to me, it's a great glove, but we don't get any points for that in our leagues last we checked. He's a one-trick pony. You know, he got a lot of stolen bases last year. 50 stolen bases is nothing to turn your nose up at. But he also had a great start to the season and then really scuffled the rest of the way. I liked him because he had the bonus eligibility of shortstop as well. He's probably going to play quite a bit more this year in terms of playing shortstop. You know, they've talked a little bit in Milwaukee about how they're going to play that. They got a bunch of different guys, but here's the issue. He can't hit lefties. And so like Jack was saying before, there's probably going to be 50 some games where he's sitting or where they go to a different way. They've got Joey Ortiz. They've got Caleb Durbin now they got from the Yankees. They also have Andrew Monasterio, who's a bench guy. They've got a lot of mouths to feed there. And I just wonder if we're going to see a downturn in that, because even if he goes down to 30 stolen bases with a 250 batting average, he's just really not helping you all that much at this point, I don't think.
No.
All right, so Bryce Terang and Alexis Diaz. I'm just going to piggyback off what you said about Diaz. I just looked him up because honestly, I haven't even looked at his stats. Like whenever I've been on the clock and Alexis Diaz has been there, I just don't even look at him. It's just not even a consideration. I haven't done like a deep dive on his stats, and they are horrid. Like they're worse than I even realized. How did this guy keep his job all year? He had a 22.7% K rate and a 12.8% walk rate.
Right.
So I'm not the best at math, but that comes out to 9.9% K minus walk, which is just terrible for any major league pitcher. Just 4.48 Sierra. Like this is not a closer.
No.
And I think now you have a different manager in there with Francona coming in. I just can't imagine he's long for this job. While I have you on this topic, Mike, who do you like in that bullpen? Because it just feels like there's no one looking at ADP. There's really no one that people are really speculating on that they're going to take that job. I know Santillan is getting some helium now. He kind of feels like the best option, but obviously he's never done it. I mean, do you think they sign somebody? Do you think one of these other guys in the pen get a shot? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I go back to the conversations that I've had with you guys offline, and also I've talked about it with Eno a couple times in passing and brought it up with Rick Graham at our presentation in Arizona. I can't understand why Graham Ashcraft never gets a chance at this job. I mean, I think he's a relief pitcher in training. I think he would really fit well there. I do agree with your take on the idea that they could look to sign someone if they do trade Diaz. I mean, I think if they start the season with him as closer, it won't be long before Terry Francona is looking for another option. I would say Terry Francona would be pulling out his hair, but he doesn't have any. So I don't think that that's going to be an issue for him there. But I wonder about, I do wonder about Graham Ashcraft kind of getting a chance there. Another guy that they've been really high on in the minors has been Chase Petty, and there's been talk about him going to the bullpen too. But, they're still looking at him as a starter at this point. And you don't draft a guy well, they didn't draft him, Minnesota did, but you don't draft a guy in the first round to turn him into a closer usually. Based on what we have here, when we look at what's available on Roster Resource, there's really no names that really turn you on and say, "Ooh, boy, that's really sexy."
You usually get turned on when you look at Roster Resource.
Well, not when I look at the White Sox.
Oh yeah.
If we're being honest, but no, I do find it interesting to see how they kind of slot people and what they're thinking. I mean, obviously Emilio Pagan has experience closing, but it wasn't really a great experience. They really don't have anybody there. I mean, Ronzi Contreras is a bit of an interesting name, but he's not met with any success. I would be prone to looking at, Ashcraft, quite honestly. I mean, I think he's a dart throw at the end of a draft, and if you're in a 50 round draft, I can think of worse options than doing that. But I'm telling you, he really, when you look at him, if you take a deep dive on him, which you should, take a look at that at some point and see, he's got a closer makeup.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, so he's been selected. I pulled it up. He's been selected in 6 out of, I think, around 40 DCs. So some people are taking the shot, and you're probably right. Not a bad. There's just no clear options there. I mean, Santillan had really good skills when he came back. So, it was a small sample. We'll see if he can carry that over. But I wonder if they're also like a dark horse to sign one of these these crusty guys, like a little Clerk or Robertson, or like someone like that who they're obviously not going to sign like a Tanner Scott or spend a lot of money. But yeah, I wonder if they bring in somebody like that. Because
somebody looking to rebuild value on a
Exactly.
1-year deal, right? Yeah.
yeah,
A guy like Leclerc would be a good spec for them, although it would be replacing one problem with another.
it would be right. It would be the same thing basically, but I think he's a little better than Alexis.
I
Diaz.
do too. I do too.
So yeah, that'll be interesting. But we got a little, we went off on an aside there, but yeah, some good names. My two, and sticking with closers here, I feel like in this range from 100 to 200, like all of these closers are kind of bad picks. Like I just look at some of these guys that are going in this range, and I have very little confidence that they're going to keep this job, whether it's through a team bringing in a free agent. Like, do I really think Porter Hodge is going to hold on to this job?
The answer is no.
Yeah, I don't see it. Like, I don't know if they go and sign somebody, but it just doesn't seem like, for where he's going, I would not feel confident taking him. He's going around, trying to find it here. It's going in like that 150 to 175 range, if I'm not mistaken. And just, I'm not about that. There's a Fairbanks I'm not confident in, whether it's because of the injury history and the fact that Tampa Bay has like tons of electric arms behind him. Like if he falters a little bit, they're going to move on, I think, pretty quick. So I just feel like the whole closer market, it is what it is, right? Like I don't think, like, it's not a rational market, just because of the way the position is. There's so few guys that have lockdown roles. So I guess you're just gonna, it's the nature of the market that you're going to have some really like not strong names going in this range, because somebody has to go there. Like you have to speculate on somebody. So,
right.
But the one that I like the least is probably, I don't know, worse than Fairbanks, but the one I wrote down here was Ben Joyce. I think he's getting a lot of love. Just, I mean, you see the stuff, you see how hard he throws. What do you throw? 105 miles an hour, something ridiculous. But I think people are a little bit enamored with that, and they're not fully understanding the context of the situation. And the context is he has Ron Washington as his manager. And we saw it last year. We thought that he was going to get the role in the second half. And I know he got some saves at the end, but it's not like they just said, here, just go run with the job. Like there were other, I don't even know who they had, like other guys that were getting saves. And I just don't, I think people are a little overconfident that that's going to be the case, that he's just going to get the job to start the year. And even though he has electric stuff and he throws really hard, I mean, the strikeout numbers aren't really what you would expect, right? He has a 23 or last year in 34 innings, he had a 23% K rate to go along with a 10% walk rate, which is, not great. Good ground ball percentage and, very good quality of contact. But I don't know. I'm not super confident that he is going to be given that job. And if he is, if he's going to be able to hold it. So, but yeah, in general, I think the closer market is just kind of wild in this range. And it reinforces for me, I kind of want to get my closers early, at least one, right? Like at least get one. I'm finding these 15 teamers, you kind of have to get one in that round 3 to round 4 range, like a Hader, Diaz, Miller, Helsley, even. Like I feel like once you get past like Felix Bautista, who personally I'm not even a huge fan of myself because of him missing the whole year with injury. That's another story. But I feel like you have to get one there at least, or else you're gonna be in a tough spot and picking from some not so great options.
Yeah, for sure. I think you have to pick at least one, and I'm contemplating. I'll say it out loud. I'm contemplating doing 2 pretty quickly. Even though I know that I'll suffer in other places, just so I don't have to worry about it. Because people say you can get saves on the waiver wire, and I just want to ask them where.
That wasn't really the case. Yeah.
In a lot of the leagues that we play in, the really competitive leagues, those guys are snapped up a week before they get a job, or maybe even 2 weeks, or they get drafted. And people just take them as leverage guys to have on their bench. You're not going to be able to find out. I agree with you on both Fairbanks and Joyce for what it's worth. Fairbanks is now like the 3rd highest paid player on the Rays. There's no way that's going to stand. I mean, they're going to pay $3.5 million to a closer. They're not going to.
Right. And the skills
and
are degrading.
Yeah.
It's
I
If
not
he
don't
gets
trust him
traded,
outdoors either.
yeah,
what
I
Outdoors.
was
mean,
it?
Outdoors, I don't trust him outdoors.
That's the
no,
other factor too, right?
if he gets traded, he might not be closing anymore. So
Right.
there's that too. And you said the same thing with Joyce. I mean, Roster Resource has him penciled in for 27 saves. I don't know. I just don't see it. I mean, they also have Robert Stevenson lurking, who
Mhm.
he had the surgery last April, so he's not gonna be ready to start the year, but he's gonna be ready at some point. And they paid him a ton of money, so
Right.
we'll have to see how that works out.
And I don't think Joyce can stay on the field either.
Right. There's that. There's the
major
injury
injuries.
piece. Yeah. There's just so many ways with these guys like that it could go wrong. And I still feel like in this range, there's a lot of really good players, right? Still a lot of good starters, everyday players, everyday
Mhm.
hitters. Like I really think, you're putting yourself into a tough spot if you miss on one or two of these guys.
Yeah.
The other player, I already gave you two, but I want to name one other player that stuck out to me, and that's Luis Heel. Just looking at Heel's skills here, I know he got off to a great start, and he ended up winning Rookie of the Year, which I'm not sure that was really warranted, but he had 15 wins, which makes things seem a lot nicer. But if you look under the hood, we're still looking at a 12% walk rate for Heel over the full season, and that was really the big thing with him. Did he have the command, the control to be a starter? And a 12% walk rate, over a full year, that makes you pretty borderline. Even if you are getting, even if you have a 27% K rate, you're walking a very thin line there. So also factor in, he had a 237 batting average on balls in play. We know that league average is around 300. Now, some guys can just, they run lower BABIPs, and I'm not sure that Luis Heel has demonstrated he is that type of pitcher. So yeah, I mean, it's nothing in quality of contact that he gives up that indicates he should be running that low of a BABIP. So I think if you see some regression with that, and the walk rate stays in the same range, I think you could see Heel out of the rotation at some point this year, which makes me upset because supposedly the Yankees didn't trade for Kyle Tucker because the Astros wanted Luis Heel, which is
Mhm.
an egregious error, in my opinion. I know they didn't want to get burned like they did with Michael King, but anybody who understands the most basic things about baseball analytics could look under the hood and say Michael King has much better skills than Luis Heel. But I don't know if the Yankees are quite advanced enough to make that determination. And just one quick thing to note on the batting average and balls in play. I mean, honestly, like when you look at something like that, I feel like we are so advanced now in our understanding of pitching and the different metrics that we have, and we get so in the weeds with it. And sometimes I just like to zoom out, and I think batting average and balls in play, we've been using it for a long time now. And I think people kind of just like overlook it. It's like old news. But I think just being simple and looking at something like that can get you most of the way there, right? Like if I see a player that has that low of a BABIP, I'm pretty much, and they're going this high, I'm kind of crossing them off. Like I don't want, because that regression will come, right? And think about it like baseball, like every little thing in a game matters, right? Like if you're watching a game and there's a pitch that should have been called a strike that's called a ball, you'll think about how that changes the at bat, right? Like innings, at bats, innings, they change on those little things.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So think about it like when a ball falls in that, or a ball finds a fielder's glove when maybe, it should have fallen in for a hit. Like those just change, like that little thing changing changes the whole inning, can change the whole
Mhm.
game.
Mhm.
And, change your final stat line, which has a huge impact on your final season ERA, right? Like pitchers only get 25 to 30 starts. So I just want to bring that up to make a bigger point about sometimes we just need to kind of keep things simple, right? And not get too far in the weeds, which I think sometimes we do a little too often nowadays. So I will get off my soapbox. We got to take a quick commercial break, and we will be back with some more fantasy baseball talk. All right, we are back. So I'm going to kick this over to Dave because there were a few names going in this 100 to 200 range that I thought were interesting. And given the way Dave follows injuries, I wanted to get his take on where these players are at in their recovery and what he thinks about their current cost. So I've got 3 names here. I've got Shane McClanahan, Robbie Ray, and Spencer Strider. So Dave, tell us about these guys and what your thoughts are and whether you're interested in them at their current prices.
Yeah, these are 3 pretty big names that a couple years ago wouldn't be in this range, but for different reasons, here we are. Shane McClanahan, right now, he's around pick 100, 103 or something like that. It's his second Tommy John surgery, which to me is scary. We look at Walker Buehler last year. It took a while for him to get control, his command. It took up until maybe the playoffs for him to really start to look like the pitcher he once was. They say he should be good to go come the start of the season. That'll be 19 months since he had the surgery, and that's pushing it of the higher end of timelines. They also say he should be going 150 plus innings. That's what they're expecting this year. And I mean, last September, he was pushing 94, 95 with some live BP. All that being said, around pick 103, I'm going to stay away from him. I would rather have someone like Logan Webb or Sonny Gray at that range.
Okay. What about, because I think Ray and Strider are going right next to each other. So what are your thoughts on them?
Yeah. So Ray's going at around 145. He had an up and down return from Tommy John. Like others, his command and control, they were off, and it takes a while. It was interesting that his walk rate was up to levels like they were before he made those changes to become the dominant pitcher that he was. And it seemed like the biggest indicator of post Tommy John surgery, because last season he had 6 hit batters in just 30.2 innings. And even back in the day when he had high walk rates, he didn't hit that many batters. So this was just who he was post Tommy John surgery. And I know he had the hamstring injury as well, and that might have just been due to either him not having pitched, for a long time, or because he likes to wear really tight pants. I don't know. The ADP is a little steep, but if I'm looking at that area, there's a lot of questionable pitchers that are going around there, like Brian Wu that we talked about, Kodai Senga, Alcantara, Pete Fairbanks, Porter Hodge. So of all of those pitchers that are going around there, I probably would take a chance on Robbie Ray, but I wouldn't want him to be anything more than my SP3 at that point.
Okay.
And then Spencer Strider, he's going around 146. It's already been announced that he would likely be delayed, but it should be a straightforward recovery as the UCL was intact. So it just needs stabilization from the bone fragment that he'd apparently been pitching with for years. He anticipates that he'll be facing live hitters by the end of February. So the hope is that he'll start pitching at spring training and then likely like a rehab assignment just before coming back a month later. That's what Mark Bowman said. And he follows the Braves for MLB. The goal for them is to have him healthy for October. So they will be slowly bringing him back. All that being said, I would take him around this time, but again, he would have to be my SP3. I think the upside is there to be your SP2.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for your thoughts on those players, Dave. We are going to transition away from baseball talk and go to our final segment, which we do every episode, which is our mental health minute. So for those of you who are listening for the first time, this is a segment where Mike, Dave, and I each talk about things that we're currently doing or or just suggest strategies to help maintain overall wellness. And this can be physical wellness, this could be mental wellness, because, this is an issue that a lot of us don't talk about, especially men. So we like to, to discuss it here on the show. So I'm going to start with you, Mike. Tell us what you are doing to maintain your wellness right now.
Well, I think it's very easy at the beginning of the new year to look at things and say, I'm going to make some big changes. I'm going to really make some goals and I'm really going to go after it. And we have a tendency to bite off more than we can chew. We have a tendency to overpromise and underdeliver. And at this time of year, it's winter here. We're expecting the snowstorm this weekend here. Maybe it hits south. Maybe it doesn't hit at all. We don't know. It's been cold, not so great. It's real easy to get bogged down on that. In the Midwest, which neither one of you live in, we're very used to gray winters, not a lot of sun, not a lot of light, not a lot of those types of things. And when I get into that mode, I really have a tendency to lose connection. If you think of it like a Wi-Fi connection, I get those breaks in it, and then I don't always want to reconnect. And so my thing for this year, my challenge to myself is that when I start to feel that way, almost on a monthly basis, I can chart it where I feel like I need to be disconnected a little bit. That's going to really be my buzzword this year, is going to be connection, to really make sure that I stay connected to my friends, that I stay connected to my group chats, and that I don't drop out of those things for a couple of days at a time. You guys are part of that structure for me. We talk every day on our group chat, and I need that. It really provides not only some really good laughs every once in a while, like when you make fun of yourself for mentioning guys that aren't on the right teams, Chris, or whatever it might be. Like, we need those moments of levity, and it helps me stay grounded and recognize that there are people who value me in the world outside of what I do professionally. And I really enjoy that. And that's going to be my goal this year, is to not take on more than what I can, and to really work on staying connected. As a guy, I have a tendency to get disconnected and get lost in my own thought processes. And that can be really bad and dangerous for a lot of people. I'm not in harm's way. There's nothing wrong in that regard. But when I start to feel like I need to be disconnected is when I think I need to start recognizing that I need to work on staying connected, if that makes sense.
Yep. And that's an intentional thing, right? Like, I noticed for myself too, doesn't just happen, right? Like, I need to put in that effort to stay connected. So it's funny, that's actually what I was going to talk about in some some form of that was connection. But let me get to Dave first, and I'll say my piece.
Well, for me, I at the end of the year, I always like to reflect back on things that I've done, things that worked and things that didn't. And one of the things that worked for me this year, because I look on my phone, I've got like a Runkeeper app. Not a sponsor, but I mean, at any point if they'd like to. But it summarizes what I've done for the year. And it said that on average, I took 12,664 steps a day, which I was blown away. I didn't think I did, but I know that every day I like to go for at least one walk just to clear my mind, or just to, change what's going on in my life. And, I listen to podcasts all the time. So I think what I'm going to continue doing, because it helps me mentally and it helps me physically, is just continue to walk, rain or shine, snow or whatever it is. And just, for me, knock on wood, it's working. So I'm going to keep it going.
Love it. Keep moving. All right. So like I said, part of what I wanted to talk about today was connection, and how that came up. I was thinking today, just kind of reflecting on things before the kids woke up, and when I have a moment to think, and I was kind of checking in with myself, and I'm like, things are going pretty well. If I take a step back, like, I feel like I'm in a pretty good place mentally. And I was like, well, why is that? Am I doing something differently? Is my situation just different? Part of it is my situation's a little different. Like, my kids are finally, both out of, are both, they could wipe their own butts. That's it's always like a nice.
That's huge.
That's a really nice milestone to reach.
Game changer.
Yeah, the only butt I have to wipe is my own these days,
and you don't do it that well. We know.
I don't do it well, but it's it frees up time. So I feel like my kids becoming independent. I'm just kind of, me and my wife are getting into like a new phase. So that's part of it. But I also was thinking about just feeling more connected than I have in a long time. And honestly, part of it, I've spoken about it before, is being part of this fantasy baseball community. It really has added a lot of value to my life, being connected with you guys and forming relationships. And, my friend Nathan, who I talk to almost every day, we share teams together, and, just talking to people on Twitter. It's not the same as like face to face, friendships, but it definitely adds value. So feeling connected in that way. I also, my wife and I moved to this town here in New York. It's a small town, and where everybody kind of knows each other, and it's just a really nice place to live, like where there's a really nice sense of community, and people are just like, down to earth and support each other. And I was really reflecting on that. Like I'm really blessed to live in an area where I feel this sense of connection, because I know that's not the case everywhere. So like just recognizing like that I have more connection in my life. I think, that was just kind of like, I really thought about that. I'm like, that really is such a key for me. And I think for all of us. I mentioned many times my work as a therapist, and that's usually one of the first things that I look at when a client first comes to me. This is kind of like my theory of psychology that I think I may have mentioned on this show before. But like, the two things that I look at, like when someone is struggling mentally, emotionally, I like to look at, number one, where is their sense of connection? Are they feeling isolated? Are their relationships not going well? And kind of looking at that, and also their sense of purpose, which, that's a conversation for another day. But, I feel like a lot of people are kind of just like walking around, and they're not, either they don't know what their purpose is, like they don't know like how to figure that out, or they know what it is, but they're just not living. They're just not making choices every day that are in line with their purpose and their values. Right. So like looking at those two things, I feel like at least one of them, if somebody's struggling, usually it's one of those boxes that's not checked, and often it's both. So yeah, I think I guess my message is just really pay attention to that. To pay attention, we're talking about connection here specifically. Like just really pay attention to where that sense of being connected is, and if it's not being fulfilled, really making an intentional effort to do that. Maybe it is, talking to more people on social media. Not the same as in person, like I said, but I think there is value. Like if you find like-minded people, there can be value in seeking out those types of relationships, or whether it's in your community or a hobby or at work or, a religious community, whatever it is, putting in that effort to make sure you're checking that box. Because I think sometimes we lose sight of that. So that is, that's my last word, I guess. But we're going to leave it there. We'll be back in 2 weeks with our next episode that we'll be recording on the 16th of January. We're going to have Jalen Thompson, who writes about the Kansas City Royals. We've had him on before. He's a fantastic guest. So we're looking forward to that conversation. I meant to plug this earlier, but I'm going to say it now. I do encourage you to follow us on Twitter. We do have a Twitter account. It's at fantasy, the letter B, beat. We would appreciate if you give us a follow there. We try to post frequently with different beat writer articles. We'll post clips from the show, tell you when we're going to be dropping new episodes. So, encourage you to follow us there. But anyway, that is all for today. For Dave Funnel, for Mike Carter, I'm Chris Torres. Thank you so much for listening to the Fantasy Baseball Beat.